Welcome to the show. I'm Doug Johnson. Each month we highlight someone who has an important message for us, a strategy for success that we can all use. Today we have with us the Executive Happiness Coach. And you're probably wondering, just as I did, exactly what the Executive Happiness Coach does.
When I say that I believe you have superpowers that you haven't tapped into, I am talking about things that you have been able to do since you were a child that were either conditioned out of you by your family or conditioned out of you by the school system that you went to. You know how to create joy when you walk into a room. You know how to make people smile. You know how to amuse yourself and how to focus on the things that make you happy. You know that. You knew it from birth. And then you went into a school system that said, no, you have to sit still right now. You have to do what we tell you right now, in the way we tell you. Yeah, we know you like to dance, but there's no music in school. So please sit still. And so after a while, you learned how to comply with the system, how to get along, how to not make noise, and you lost the awareness of your superpower, but you still have it. And so what I like to do with adults, I don't always use the language of superpower, but what I like to do is help you dig in and find that and discover that you really still can experience joy, dance, amuse yourself, take your own oxygen, and live a happier or more balanced life without having to wait for other people to tell you when it's time.
Wow, that's just a taste of what my friend Jim Smith does as the Executive Happiness Coach. And he is with us today in person to tell us more. Jim is an executive and life coach, international speaker, author, and change consultant. Jim, thanks so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
So Jim, first, exactly what is a happiness coach?
Well, a coach in general is someone who shows up and partners with a client to help them move somewhere faster, achieve more of their potential, get past obstacles. I call myself the Executive Happiness Coach because I base a lot of my work around happiness and a lot of learnings from the field of positive psychology and positive emotion. So the work that I do is primarily around helping people, figuratively speaking, to build stronger happiness muscles.
Okay.
The executive part is because I focus on people in leadership roles, because the way the boss shows up generally impacts everybody else. It kind of, whatever the boss brings into the workplace flows down from there. And so I target leaders because if we can get them happier and more balanced, then they tend to affect everybody else in the organization in a positive way. But the tools that I use, anyone can use in their life, no matter what you do, even if you don't come into the workplace.
Great. So the advice that you gave about faking it until you make it on the clip is actually a piece of advice that you would give someone that you're coaching.
It is one of the most universal pieces of advice about exercising your emotional muscles. Try on that mood, walk around in a happy body, and what you'll notice is that the emotions kind of catch up with however you're behaving. Of course, the opposite works too. If you walk around in anger and resentment all day like this, you know what kind of emotion is going to show up?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Jim, one of your deep beliefs is that happiness is a decision, not an event.
Yes.
Can you talk about that, please?
I sure can. Happiness is a decision, not an event is actually my personal life motto. It came up for me in the mid-1980s, which is the first time I ever wrote a life plan or a personal vision. And it eventually became my business mantra. And what I mean by it is this. Happiness isn't something that's kind of like lurking around corners waiting to pounce on you. It's not something that falls like rain from the sky. It's not something that's going to happen to you. Happiness is really the result of making a conscious decision to pay attention to what's going on in the world and making a decision about which lens you are going to use to notice what's going on in the world. Whether you're going to use a dark lens based on fear and anger or sadness or the concern that things will always go wrong, or whether you choose to use a positive lens and look for some of the things that are going right and going well. Because both exist in the world, always.
Okay.
And the more often you choose to look at what's going well, the more you're going to experience happiness.
Well, in talking about both types of lenses, if you will, I know that you've had some tragedy in your life, and obviously you have chosen to take those circumstances and look at them through a positive lens.
Yes.
And that is what has led you to become the executive happiness coach. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. I would not say that I've always been a happy person. I suffered from depression when I was younger. I had some dark years earlier in my life. I discovered the field of happiness and what was then the very infant field of positive psychology. Everybody knows about it today. 20 years ago, not so much. And I brought a lot of the principles from the research into my life and my work and literally studied happiness and then did some of the things from that field with my family. Like one of the things we did at our dinner table, I had 4 kids, and in many families, you know, everybody goes around, what's something you learned today? Or there's always a question. And ours was, what's something good that happened to you today? I didn't call it that back then, but it was a gratitude exercise. So we would do a lot of that. When my second daughter was 22, she died suddenly of a cerebral hemorrhage. And it was a terrible time for us as a family. Yet one of the experiences that I had in that time was that while we were grieving, I was also kind of sitting back and noticing how we as a family were responding. I mean, there'd been other deaths in the family. I saw how other people dealt with death. And her 3 siblings, while they were all just as crushed as we were, they were pretty resilient. And so were my wife and I. You know, it's very hard to describe right now that experience of just noticing that I am in dark grief, and at the same time, I am noticing my ability to focus on the positive. For instance, noticing how many people showed up and said, you know, Kara was our best friend. And noticing and admiring the impact she'd had in the world because she'd been raised in this positive environment. And that experience taught me one thing principally, and that is this stuff really works. All this stuff I've been experimenting with on my kids, it really works. So it was after that I decided to bring it into the workplace.
That's really kind of neat. You've written a book about happiness at the speed of life, 13 powerful strategies for finding happiness at home and on the job. Can you talk about the 13 principles?
Yeah, the 13 principles emerged for me over a period of years. The first time it was 20-some, and then it was 19, and 13 is my lucky number since I was born on a Friday the 13th. So I eventually folded it into that. And each of them is essentially a life strategy. It's something that you can do that will strengthen your positivity, strengthen your positive emotional space.
Okay. What are some of the specific strategies?
Well, if we were to reference some of the principles, one of them, the first one is to be positively selfish. We are often taught in our society that we're supposed to be selfless. Like you go to church on Sunday or Friday or Saturday, whatever day you go, and there's someone who's saying you have to care for everybody else, you have to get out of yourself, you have to care for the world. And I say amen to that, and recognize that before you go out and take care of everybody else, you have to take your own oxygen first.
Okay.
Because if you don't have any capacity for dealing with other people.
So kind of like being in an airplane, and if something happens, the airline...
Right, the oxygen mask drop down, here's how you put it on.
Exactly, right.
And so if you're traveling with a small child or someone who is behaving like a small child, you want to put on your own mask first.
Mm-hmm.
So that for me is one of the it's one of the foundational principles of the 13, in that you got to fill up your own oxygen tank,
mm-hmm.
and then you can turn around and take that out to others in the world.
Okay. What are some of the other principles?
Well, one of my favorites really is pay attention.
Okay.
Pay attention. We often live like boiled frogs. If you're familiar with that metaphor, the concept is that frogs are amphibians and they adjust to their environment. So if you take a frog and you pop him into a pan of hot water, the frog's going to go, "Ah, hot water," and jump out. But if you take that same frog and put them into a pan of cold water and then turn the heat up just a tiny bit, the water will heat and they'll adjust, and the water will heat and they'll adjust. And they'll eventually be in a hostile environment but be completely oblivious to it because they just get used to it. And that's the way people live their lives. We are all of us boiled frogs.
Okay.
And paying attention is about every once in a while stepping back and saying, what's really going on around me? Not only negative stuff, but also what is some of the good stuff that I've stopped noticing? So I always encourage people to do things that will pull them out of their patterns.
Okay.
Like drive a different path to work one day. Instead of always making it about getting there fast, take the scenic route and notice. Or one of my favorite exercises to recommend to clients who are kind of stuck is to live their life for a day as a tourist in their own life.
Interesting.
So you don't have to take a vacation day. Just get up in the morning and put on a camera, and all day long stop every few minutes and take a picture of whatever it is you're doing or whoever it is you're with. What that does is it causes you to notice, oh, when I walked in for coffee this morning, that person knows my name. I hadn't paid attention to that nice little thing, right? Or noticing just some of the features of a landscape or the beauty of the world, the sky, things that we just tend not to pay attention to. And there's a lot of joy in paying attention.
I think one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past is the term savoring.
Yes.
And how does that fit?
Well, paying attention is about being present right now.
Okay.
That is one of the it's part of the practice of being happy, is being now.
Okay.
Happiness is now. Optimism is about the future. Gratitude is about what's past. Happiness is about what's now. Those are three different time zones, if you will, of happiness. Savoring is also about the past, coming into the present. Savoring is about taking a good memory from the past and living it now. Telling a story about some time from your past, the good old days. I have a 3.5-year-old grandson right now, and he has picked up this phrase of "in the old days," which of course for him mean like when he was 3 or 2.5, right? And it's got us thinking a lot about, oh yeah, you know, there's always good stuff you can bring forward and speak about, talk about, remember. And when you do that, and you put yourself back in that story, you feel happiness now about that thing from the past.
Jim, excuse me, there is a great example of that. And several years ago, I know that you entered a contest called the Christmas Food Memory and won first place. And I think that the article that you wrote to compete with just absolutely addresses what we have just talked about here. And I know that you have a copy of that. And if you would like to share your entry, I think it explains the fond memory of your mom's famous fudge, and it should be famous. I've had some, it's wonderful. And also savoring the moment.
The exercise of savoring.
Right.
Okay. All right. All right, so I have it here. Again, it was a Christmas food memory contest. So here's the story. It was the fudge. Oh, God, how I waited for Christmas each year because my mom only made her two specialties then, cinnamon shortbread cookies and her famous fudge. My mom's fudge was deeply, darkly chocolatey, and she tossed in a tiny bit of crushed candy canes for a teensy bit of peppermint. Once the fudge was set, she cut it into little 1-inch squares so one pan yielded hundreds. And this was important because I was one of 8 kids. So here's how I ate that fudge, and it's still how I eat chocolate today.
And savor it.
And savor it. So open your mouth, insert one piece. Close your mouth and do not chew. Just let it dissolve. Ooh. Feel the buttery, chocolatey, slightly granularness of it on your tongue. Mash it up against the roof of your mouth. Feel the chocolate juices running out of the fudge. Patience. Do not chew. Feel the silky softness and then the tiny shards of peppermint that touch the tongue as the fudge dissolves. Close your eyes and swim around in the darkness of it. Patience. And wait for it. And when there's nothing left but the peppermint with just a little pool of fudginess, then it's okay to chew up the rest. And you know, once I grew up and started making that fudge myself, I learned it's extremely simple.
Yes.
Yet that act of eating it, that is still how I always consume good dark chocolate. One piece on the tongue, and just be fully present to the chocolate and savor every moment of that chocolate. Makes me salivate talking about it.
Well, I have to admit, Jim, that when you sent me the story and the recipe for the fudge, I tried it and I decided to follow your description exactly. And I have to say, I think it made the fudge, which was absolutely wonderful on its own, so much better because I did savor it. I did enjoy the moment. And so now, whenever I have a piece of chocolate or a piece of fudge, I do it that same way. And it's amazing how just pulling yourself into the present and allowing yourself to enjoy the moment really can change your attitude.
Yeah.
It's just a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, I think savoring in the moment can change your attitude about anything. Pick up the next time you pop a bowl of popcorn, instead of shoveling it into your mouth while you mindlessly watch a movie, try eating it one kernel at a time and notice how much better it tastes.
I think that's something that we all should try more often. I've also heard you talk, Jim, about superpowers within us. Can you explain what you mean by that?
I believe that we are all born with a set of superpowers, and those superpowers are really about changing the emotional space of a room. Picture a baby, any baby, any child you would call a baby. You know, think about their coming into a room. If they are crying, they immediately get everybody concerned about them. Everyone's emotion shifts to taking care of that baby, right? If the baby's in a good mood, all it takes is one smile, and everybody in the room lights up. Babies have this immense power to change the emotional resonance of everyone around them. And then, you know, we take those babies and we have them grow up and we learn them how to step in line and go to school and stay still and be quiet and all that stuff that we indoctrinate children with. And one day, these babies show up as clients for me as a coach, and I have to reteach them this superpower this capacity for shifting their own emotional space and for infecting others.
And how do you do that?
Well, it doesn't take too much learning, because the reality is you have that power.
Okay.
Just like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, you got the ruby slippers. I mean, you've got the power. You may not be thinking about activating it all the time, though. If you want to live life with happier people, start with you. Practice being happy. Put on happiness. Practice pausing and taking a breath and grounding yourself and letting go of baggage. And notice how when you shift your own mood and you become very aware of your own mood, how you can walk into just about any room, and no matter how those people are feeling, if you come in with a very powerful, positive attitude, you can shift the entire room.
Just like the baby did.
Just like the baby did.
Interesting.
And we do it all the time. I mean, think about the last time you were in a meeting and everybody was in a good mood, and somebody walked in and they were in a really crappy mood, and all of a sudden everybody shuts down.
Right.
So we know how to do this. What I call your superpower is becoming aware of it and using it on purpose, for good, not evil.
Aha. Okay. I read somewhere that happy people do look for the good.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I think that's incredibly true.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, your experience of the world really depends on the lens you use. So I often like to speak about optimism and pessimism. So both are about the future. And pessimism is when I look ahead and I expect, oh, that's not going to work so well. And, you know, there's going to be war tomorrow and pestilence and, you know, it's going to be bad weather. Or I can be an optimist and I can look ahead tomorrow and I can say, you know, somebody's going to get engaged and a baby's going to be born, or somebody's going to get healed of a sickness, or good things are going to happen. And then I ask, who's more right, the optimist or the pessimist? What do you think?
Well, hopefully it would be the optimist.
I would suggest to you that they're both right.
Okay.
Because no matter what happens, tomorrow bad things are going to happen.
True.
And tomorrow good things are going to happen. And your experience of life depends entirely on which of those you pay the most attention to. If what you do every day is you get up and you read the front page of the paper, which is all about something that died or blew up, and you watch the first 10 minutes of any news, it's always about what died and blew up.
Right.
Eventually you come to believe that the world is a dangerous place and it's not safe to go out in, and you have to live in fear. But if you skip the first 10 minutes of newscast, you get to the human interest stories. You get to shows like this one, where people are talking about the good stuff in the world, the fashion segment. You skip the first part of the newspaper and go to the Metro section, and that's all about community events and the comics and your sports team winning and so on. Your experience of life is going to be so different when you choose to look for what's going right, because it's out there.
And use your positive lens.
Use the positive lens.
Interesting. Jim, we're winding down a little. How about some last words of wisdom?
Emotional muscles are just the same as physical muscles. So if you want to get stronger, you go to the gym and lift weights. Or if you want to run a marathon, you go out and you start by walking up and down the driveway, and then you jog around the block, and then you work your way up to running a couple miles, and then eventually you'll be able to run 26.2. So if you're someone who doesn't experience a lot of happiness right now, don't try and just like be really wildly happy like me tomorrow,
Just
because
turn it on.
you'll sprain something. So instead what I suggest is start with small stuff. And the single most powerful exercise you can do to nurture your happiness muscles is the gratitude exercise, which is this simple. It's every day write down 3 good things that happened to you in the last 24 hours.
Why is it so important to write it down, Jim?
Well, the act of writing it down makes a permanent record. So you can type it on your computer, you can write it in a journal, but put it there so that you create lists. First of all, noticing it strengthens that muscle. But when you have it in documentation too, it also becomes a place to go. When you're having a bad moment, pull out that gratitude list, read through it, and I promise you, within a few minutes, you're going to notice your attitude shifting, because it's hard to feel sad or depressed when you're in the presence of all the really good stuff in your life.
Well, I think that's great information for all of us, Jim. And for our audience, if they want to know more, hopefully they will check out your book. And I just appreciate your being here again today. And I think our audience has gained, hopefully, as much as I have from our conversation.
I hope so, too.
Thanks so much, Jim.
Thank you.
At Common Sense University, we teach people to stamp out stupid people syndrome, or, if you prefer the politically correct term, common sense deficit disorder. Did you know that stupid people syndrome is running rampant? There are actually websites devoted, and awards devoted to stupid people syndrome. The Darwin Awards are given to those people who exhibit such extreme signs of stupid people syndrome that in fact they lose their lives. The Stella Awards are given to people, and this award is named after the elderly lady who sued McDonald's a number of years ago after spilling a hot cup of coffee into her lap. The Michigan Law Abuse Watch lists labels that they call wacky. For instance, attached to a household iron, do not iron if clothes are being worn, or the label on a can of drain cleaner. If you cannot read the label or the cautions, do not use this product. As you can see, stupid people syndrome is everywhere. And the simple way to stop this, use a little common sense.